Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. I'm Way T. Lightheart from the Awesome Health Podcast, and we have an awesome guest lined up for you today. He's a life stylist, and just to give you a little bit of background, Luke Storey, and you can check him out at lukestorey.com. This guy has lived 15 lives in one life. He's been worked with Aerosmith way back in 1990. Love those guys. He is what's called a lifestylist. We'll get into what that is. He's been a model. He's been an instructor. He coaches people. He's been poisoned by frogs in the Amazonian frogs. And he's a world-class biohacker. Not only does he look good, he sounds good. And he's got a lot of wisdom to share because I believe what you're doing now is you're just kind of help people lifestyle their lives, which is what everybody's talking about. But I don't know if a lot of people know how to get here. So, Luke, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the kind intro.
So I'm just curious, what is a lifestylist right off the bat? Let's start there and then we'll kind of get some background.
Well, you mentioned, my former career, which was a fashion stylist. And for those people that aren't in the entertainment or fashion industry and don't know what that means, essentially, that's just someone who dresses other people for a living. So I did that for about 17 years here in Hollywood. So I dressed celebrities and musicians and things for music videos and magazine editorial shoots and TV commercials and all that kind of stuff. And so while I was in my own personal life pursuing metaphysics, meditation and spirituality and all types of yoga and going to India and getting really into all aspects of physical health and was really obsessed with that in my private life, professionally, I was kind of in the Hollywood machine. And so what I did was I went around town basically every day and, well, not just around town, but all over the world in some cases, and put together the best outfits for people to look good on the outside. So in a superficial kind of way, I was using my artistic ability to create an image that the client wanted. And so that was kind of my day job. But when that was over, I went home and just did the things that I'm really into, which is more in the health and wellness space. And so when I decided 3 years ago to start my podcast and retire from being a fashion stylist, I just kind of had to come up with a name for what I did. And I thought, well, it's similar in a sense to curating a look for someone, but it's on a deeper level. So it's curating lifestyle practices and principles and, discovering them and then helping to integrate them into other people's lives. And the vehicle that I chose to do that with was the Lifestylist podcast that I've been doing now for 2 years. And so for a while, I did some coaching, working one-on-one with people and stuff like that. And then that ended up I don't really have time to do that because I have other things going on. So now I'm doing more speaking engagements and retreats and intensives, workshops, things like that, where I can take a group of people and help them integrate some of these principles and practices rather than doing it one person at a time.
So I'm super fascinated by this almost what some people would perceive as a dual life.
Totally.
You have this kind of external, glamorous Hollywood kind of program, which is all about what's kind of appearances and outside. And anybody that's gone through a little bit of the Hollywood scene knows that it's not necessarily what it is, it's what it looks like and shaping people's impressions. And it's, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, that industry is very, what would appear superficial to some people.
Yeah.
Yet you go on your site and I'm seeing autobiography of a yogi. I'm seeing Eckhart Tolle. I'm seeing Dr. David Hawkins, all authors and people who had massive impacts in my life. And I'm just touching the base.
Cool.
How did those seemingly separate worlds, how did they collide in your world? And what was the process to you to get there? So I'm sure there's a story here. So maybe you want to start from the beginning,
there's
growing up, and then how that looked.
Yeah, there's a very classical hero's journey here, and that was I had, like many people, fairly rough childhood. I'm sure some had it worse, but I experienced a lot of trauma, and there was a lot of dysfunction in my environment, and as a result, I developed a lot of pathology, and on the physical level, I was very ill and malnourished. I became horribly addicted to drugs and alcohol, had a lot of legal problems, was, went to jail when I was 14 years old. It's
Wow.
just like, had a really weird upbringing. And now, of course, in retrospect, it's my greatest gift, because it's what's propelled me into all of the different elements of personal development that I've explored. But for me, it was abject pain and suffering. I moved to Hollywood when I was 19. I got into the music industry. I was playing in bands. I'm a musician. And so I just, was living this, in one sense, dream lifestyle. Here I am, just out of high school. I dropped out of high school, moved to Hollywood, started hanging around with and playing in bands with a lot of my heroes, my musical heroes and things like that. And so it was just a really exciting, fun time, but I was so addicted to drugs. And then when I got access to some of the more dangerous illicit drugs that were available on the streets of Hollywood in the early 90s, it got really dark over the course of 5 or 6 years of living here. And then at a certain point, it became clear to me that I was seriously facing an imminent and painful dead end of a life. And so I made a decision to sober up, and I checked myself into rehab and did that whole thing. And when I was in there, I had a profound spiritual experience that rendered me totally sober from that day until this moment now, which is coming up on 22 years. February 15th, 1997 was the day. And something happened to me, and I began to become obsessed with exploring what that spiritual transformation was, and became deeply involved in recovery work. And then, infiltrating the recovery into different elements of my life: sex, money, relationships, all compulsive, obsessive, false coping mechanism kind of behavior, and continue to ferret those things out till this day. Now it's my cell phone across the room. That's my current addiction. And I'm seeing there's some behavior there that is not serving me. It's just, I don't do anything weird on my phone. It's just compulsively checking it and things like that. So I come from a long line of alcoholics and addicts. And the beginning of my journey was out of abject suffering. And I just wanted to be free of pain, and I wanted to be free of the burden of addiction. And thus began my journey. But also at the same time, as you mentioned earlier, working with Aerosmith, it's a cool sort of claim to fame. But I do mention that a lot because it was a very impactful moment for me when I was in early sobriety, because Aerosmith in the late 90s were all publicly sober. And they were sort of the first rock stars to come out and say, hey, we're sober. We all went to rehab. And they were crushing it. They were huge at that time, and had, number one hits. And they were, they had the soundtrack for that movie Armageddon. I mean, Aerosmith was like the thing. They were having a huge comeback. And so I got hired by their stylist, who was an old friend of mine, and I was her assistant. And so here I am, a few months sober, and I'm just thrust into the music industry, into the fashion industry at that level. And it was really impactful, because here I saw some guys that were really successful. They had money, they had beautiful wives, they're playing rock and roll, they're rich, and they're sober, And so that was the first inspiration for me to start down the path that I continue to be on now. And, when you see spiritual books on my website and things like that, I interview a lot of spiritual leaders and heroes of mine now. And so while I was in the fashion industry, working in the Hollywood machine there on that superficial level, no one really knew, but there was something deeper going on with me. So if I was in a fitting with a celebrity client, say for a red carpet thing or a tour or music video, to them, we're just playing with clothes. But to me, it was a heart-based service. And my intention was way more broad and deep than just picking the right shoes for someone. And so I think I was really successful as a stylist because I had an ability to access empathy and compassion and relatability, and helping celebrities to feel safe. So when they would come in my fitting, it probably was very different than a lot of other people's fittings. I'm giving them a green juice and teaching them about medicinal mushrooms and talking about meditation and doing all that stuff. So it was kind of a double life in a sense, because, I didn't necessarily like push my practices on other people, but if they asked for help, or there was ever a window of opportunity where I didn't have to proselytize, but it was sort of elicited from me, then I would share that. But for the most part, I just kind of lived it on the inside. And then after work, I'd, run off and hang out with my other sober buddies and do my recovery work. And go to retreats, and as I said, go to India and really, dive deeply into meditation and things like that. So it was a double life in a sense, but for me, the life of spiritual pursuit is all pervasive. It's not something that is segregated to, oh, now I go do this when I'm off work. It's just in the context of working in Hollywood and more that superficial level. A lot of it was just kind of going on within me and not necessarily outwardly expressed. Does that make sense?
That totally
So,
makes sense.
It's not like, oh, I was on this other path and now I'm on this new path. I've always been on the same path, and that's to express my highest self and to be of service in the world and to access as much unconditional love for myself and others as possible in every given moment. And so that, took the form of putting a cute skirt on an actress one day and the next day helping out, a guy that's detoxing off crack or something, but it's all the same work. It just comes in different forms.
There's a lot to unpack in what you just said. I'm going to go back, starting with the journey through addiction, and then that transformational moment. I think this is really relevant. I think a lot of people don't want to talk about addictions. I think addictions is more rampant now. You mentioned your phone.
Yeah.
If you look at telephones today, they are producing the same response that alcohol and drugs produce in the brain, and it's every bit as addictive. I think the average person checks their phone at least 85 times a day.
Oh,
and we're seeing young people doing this. I want to, why I think this is, I'm going to tie this in, is you got it, I think, started in the pathway of addiction in your teenage years. And I see a lot of people in the digital world becoming addicted in the digital world in their teenage years, because it's actually creating a formative part of their brain development. How did that happen for you? Of course, it wasn't digital, but how did that happen to you? What do you think the hole you were trying to fill, or why did that come out in your life or express that way, do you think?
Well, I was sexually abused when I was 5 or 6 years old a couple times. And again, when I was, I don't know how old I was, maybe 11, 12, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And when it happened the first time when I was young, I mean, of course, I've had to unpack this a lot, and a lot of therapy and a lot of inner work to really, continue to resolve what had happened. But in retrospect, to simplify it as it pertains to addiction, I felt an immense amount of shame around that experience. I felt a deep sense of isolation because I didn't know how to communicate what had happened to the adults in my life, to my caretakers. And so I really went inwardly dark,
Right.
And so immediately following that, I started to have all these behavioral problems in school and things like that. I just went to visit my mom up in Northern California, and we were, I was kind of, as we do, reminiscing about the past and things like that. And she said, yeah, right when I put you in kindergarten, which is around the time that happened, you were getting kicked out of school all the time, and you were always like bullying kids and punching kids and stuff. And I felt like I was the kid that got picked on and bullied. And she's like, no, early on, you were the one doing that. And, that's how it expressed itself. And so I would say, fortunately for me, the area that I lived in Northern California in the 70s was proliferated with a lot of drugs. So, cannabis, weed was just part of the fabric of the culture there, and also cocaine and crystal meth and a lot of other drugs. What had happened was at the end of the 60s, Haight-Ashbury and the whole, summer of love thing kind of came crashing down, 68, 69, 70. And a lot of those hippies moved north, and they moved to where I was living. So, my generation's parents were kind of, many of them, the dropouts from the 60s. And so there was just a lot of drugs in the culture. And fortunately for me, there was an abundance of drugs that I could self-medicate with. And that's how I got through school. And that's how I went to soccer practice. And that's how I handled feeling so different and feeling so ashamed and feeling so alone and isolated, is I was able to just anesthetize myself. When you're 8 or 9 years old and you're smoking really strong weed, what do you weigh, like 80 pounds or something? And I'm like smoking tons and tons of weed. And then later on, 10, 11, doing a lot of cocaine and alcohol and all kinds of stuff. So
really young.
Yeah, preteen thing. And that, of course, did a lot of damage. There's a lot of side effects to that type of medication. And I think all plant medicines are useful in their own way. It's not so much the poison, it's the dose. And for me, the doses are really high because the pain was not resolved on a spiritual or psychological level. It wasn't handled professionally. I didn't, my parents didn't know that I needed to get into therapy or to get help in that way. So I just began to lie and commit crimes and to self-medicate in order just to handle being in my own skin and not jump off a bridge or something, So I'm very thankful for those experiences. And as one progresses with that self-administrated medicine, there's a lot of consequences. And for me, the consequences, as I mentioned earlier, started to, take on consequences of the legal nature and, be sitting before judges and having some serious problems, that were things that my parents couldn't reckon with. And so, that was the beginning of that pattern that developed in my life. And for me, there were no cell phones, obviously, in the 70s, but it was just, I was compulsive about everything I did because I had to be distracted from the memories that I was trying to suppress.
Right.
It's like I knew that something had happened to me, and there were things that continue to happen that were traumatic, and there was neglect and abandonment and things like that tend to happen to some kids. And so I chose the route of drugs to deal. Some kids maybe become the valedictorian and are great in sports and get obsessed with perfectionism or whatever it is. For me, it's just like, I wanted to be as bad as possible. All my heroes were the drug addict rock stars. I was really attracted to darkness and destruction. And I found a drawing the other day. Well, I didn't find, a friend of mine from high school sent it to me. It's just this, it's like a sort of a collage sketch thing of, all these upside down crosses and swastikas and just the evil of the world. I didn't draw swastikas because I was a Nazi. It was a representation of how I viewed the world at 16 years old. And it was just like all death and destruction and evil. And that's really how I used to perceive things. And when you perceive things in that way, it's very uncomfortable. It's hard to navigate through life as a kid or a teen. And so that's kind of what began that journey for me. And I'm very thankful that I got to have that experience because it gives me a certain depth and richness as a person. I mean, I really have compassion for people that are suffering, especially in that particular way.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that depth of personal story. I think that's amazing. And what's even more amazing, we're going to get to that in a minute you look fantastic. Like, how do you start off on such a, what I would say, dark and self-destructive path and get to that? We'll get to that in a minute. A couple of things that you said about the Haight-Ashbury district. I read an interview recently with George Harrison, and he talked about when he came there and then was just shattered kind of because he realized this whole culture had emerged not from that kind of peace, love, and joy, but kind of turned into this, really dark drug culture. And that was an aspect that led to his, quest for the next level of spirituality. Of course, they went to India and worked with gurus, and George, of course, made some beautiful music afterwards. And so you go through this kind of dark period. It kind of expands into the Hollywood scene. That you're living the rock star lifestyle, which is kind of like the dream lifestyle of every teenager. It hits what was the breaking point that made you change and say, I need to turn my life around? What was that crux point?
I think that there wasn't, Oh yeah, there was a moment. I'm like, there's so many moments. It's hard to isolate them,
It's kind of like you don't get the message first.
It's funny. Well, when I think back about the early 90s in Hollywood, while there were really fun times, I mean, dude, I had access to a lot of sex and excitement and, like I said, hanging around rock stars that I had their posters on my wall as a teenager. I mean, I'm living in a small town in Northern California with like posters of my favorite bands on the wall. And a year later, like, we're sitting around smoking weed in my apartment together, and playing in bands together and things like that. So there was that part of it, but that period began to get really dark. And I think there's two there's one major point, but there's also just some drawn out ones. When I began to get addicted to crack, that whole period was just, there's no way you can like go on a crack run and then get up the next day and be like, you know what? I don't have a problem. I'm fine. Like you wake up and the amount of shame and like the stuff you did and the people you were with and the environment that you're in. And I mean, I used to just roam the streets of Hollywood. There was an area called the Yucca Corridor up sort of by the Chinese Theater where I lived. And this is run by the 18th Street Gang. And it was a rough area. It was just crack everywhere. And I used to wander around there all night until the sun came up, you know, going back and doing runs over and over and over again. And I was just, you know, hanging out in abandoned buildings with homeless people and just complete nasty situations. And that began to really wear me down because there's, as I said, there's no way to, I don't know. I didn't have the wall of denial to be like, no, it's cool. I'm just having fun. I'm partying. It's not partying when it's 9 a.m. and I'm dressed like a homeless person so that I don't get mugged while I'm out scoring crack, and it's 9 o'clock and Hollywood's buzzing and everyone's driving to work and, you know, the sun's out, you know, right. I'm still going. I mean, that hurts your moral fiber. So there was a lot of that, just drawn out periods like that. But there were and also being addicted to heroin is no party either. And the periods that I was able to stay abstinent from heroin got shorter and shorter, you know, because the first time I got physically addicted, it was like, oh my God, I'm a junkie. This is horrible. And so maybe I made it a year without doing it again. And then each time I'll do it just this once. And then I'd get hooked again. And then it would be 9 months, then 6 months, then 3 months, then a couple weeks. And then I would go kick somewhere and lock myself up in a basement and withdrawal and then go right back out and get strung out again, you know. So those two drugs in particular really had an impact on me seeking sobriety. But the two pivotal moments were this. One was I was on a mushroom trip because that's how I made a living. I sold mushrooms.
Right.
And because I was unemployed. I mean, there's no way I could have a regular job. At the end, you know, it's funny. I couldn't even deal drugs right. Like I was too effed up to even be a drug dealer, which is scary. If you're listening to this and you're wondering if you have a drug problem, if you're unemployable by yourself as a dealer, you have a problem. Yeah. I'll just go out on a limb and say that. But I was on this heavy mushroom trip when I took a lot of them, sitting in my friend's apartment, which is not a great place to do mushrooms. And I had this epiphany that I was a complete loser and that I was trapped and I was in bondage and that my life was absolutely headed toward a dead end. And I remember saying to my friend, and, you know, fewer or more words, like, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. This is not going well. I'm never going to get out of this on my own. And that was the first one. And then the next one was my last self-imposed detox, you know, because I wouldn't check myself into a detox because I didn't want to get totally sober. I just wanted to quit certain drugs. I never wanted to quit smoking weed. It's like, weed's amazing. Why would I ever quit that? If I could just isolate my habit to just weed, that was always my dream, you know,
right?
Or fantasy. And if I did one thing, then I end up doing everything. That's why now I'm coming up on 20 years sober. I don't recreationally use drugs or alcohol because I've proven to myself that when I do, I don't know, it's the way I'm wired. It just takes me over and I just go nuts. So I just don't tempt fate. But the last time I checked myself into my drug buddy's little rehab in an apartment in godforsaken Tarzana or Canoga Park or somewhere way out in the valley, and I didn't have a car. And so I sometimes would pay someone to sequester me into a location where I couldn't get access to heroin. And so once you get in the throes of withdrawal, it's not like I could get in a taxi or, I mean, I had no way to get to downtown LA. I was really far away. That's the place where you would go to get it. And so during that last kick, it was horrific because I had just won a lawsuit for getting bit on the face by a Rottweiler. And so I had $7,000. And so it's the first time in my drug using history that I had all the money I could want to buy as much drugs as I could possibly ingest. So at that time, I was really strung out on heroin because I had an unlimited supply. I could just do it all day long, you know? And my money was running out. And I knew that I had a habit that I couldn't afford to keep up when that money was gone. So I went to kick at this guy's house and I would take pills and drink alcohol to just anesthetize myself from the withdrawal from the opiates. And the pivotal moment was very much like Byron Katie's pivotal moment. If anyone's familiar with her story, I came to one morning and there's no bed. I'm got a comforter or something on the dirty ass carpet floor. I'm watching old VHS movies, like probably just have The Godfather on loop or something like that. Just total like Requiem for a Dream type situation. And I look around and there's like giant cockroaches crawling by me on the floor, you know. I don't remember them being on me. Byron Katie's story, they were on her. That would have definitely sent me into a rehab. But it was enough that my life had come to the point where I'm like in some, you know, loser's dirty ass apartment in the middle of the valley, coming off heroin. I'm this close to becoming homeless myself. And then, you know, come to and just go like, oh my God, I'm like on the floor with cockroaches. That's the level of consciousness that I'm existing at right now. I exist where cockroaches exist. You know, I'm on a dirty floor and they're scrounging around for crumbs and I'm scrounging around for crumbs. And I know that inside I had access to a thread of hope that I could be more than that and that my life could have more value and more meaning than just surviving at that base level. And so that was the final moment. And I called my mom, and God bless her, you know, she was there for me. I'll be so grateful for that forever. And she'd been waiting for that call, you know, and I called her, I said, hey, you know, I'm addicted to heroin. And whenever I'd come out to people like that, they're like, duh, no kidding. It's like everyone else knew, but I thought I was so slick, you know? So she's like, yeah, I get that. What's up? I said, I'm ready to do that thing you want me to do, the rehab thing, whatever. And she's like, are you serious? You know, she couldn't believe she finally got the call. And so she facilitated getting me into treatment, and that was the end of it. And then in treatment, it was like the solution they gave me was God. I'm like, can you guys give me some Dilaudid or something? I'm dying over here. And they're like, you can pray. That's what we got, kid. You know? And so I was forced to adopt spirituality, not as a concept, not as a belief system, not as an idea, not as a religion, but as the core mechanism by which I could survive the predicament that I had gotten myself into. And so I was forced, you know, like backed into a corner, painted against the wall, to find God. And I did. And it worked, you know. My prayers were answered and I was set free from bondage and have been free ever since. So when that happened to me, it was so powerful that I couldn't let that go. I thought, man, I want more of this. If this God thing can do that, it can probably do anything. Because I had used all of my own willpower and resources and everything that I had, you know, all the ammunition I had failed. It was just like lighting. Every time I'd try to change, it was like lighting a firecracker that's a dud, you know, it's like, and nothing happens. You know, I never could like make big moves. I just hit the wall again and again and again. You know, my life was just a series of ever increasingly large speed bumps. Just like, oh God, that one hurt. Oh God, a bigger one, a worse one. And then from that moment on, it's just like I became committed. But those were a few of the moments that led up to that huge surrender, you know, when I finally went, okay, like I give myself to God. I don't care how stupid that sounds. I don't care if people judge me. Like I have to live, and I have more to accomplish in this life than to end up being a junkie.
How old were you at this time?
This is like 3 weeks ago. No, I'm just messing with you. I'm just no, I was 26. Yeah, and I'm on the eve of my 48th birthday right now. So that was 97 that happened, and so it's coming up on. It'll be 22 years this February 2019. Yeah,
that's super powerful story. I love it, and I can relate with
it's
a good
amazing.
portion.
It's amazing.
It's a good portion of that I can relate to.
I mean, it's the big why. You know, it's like people ask me, why are you so obsessed with health and spirituality and you do all this stuff all the time? Your whole day is filled with all these practices. It's because I really have a visceral relationship to feeling horribly. I mean, I know what it feels like to be suicidal all day long and just fantasize about dying. I used to live like that. I used to fantasize about killing people. I mean, this is the world that I lived in, the consciousness that I lived in, not only when I was in addiction, but even for years following getting physical sobriety, because it took me a while to get emotional sobriety and sexual sobriety, financial sobriety, all of the other ways that a person like me can be literally insane, have had to be reeled in and then constantly worked on and surrendered to get to the point that I'm at now, which is, right now at this time of this recording, life is relatively speed bump free. There's little things that come up, but, I'm sure there'll be big lessons to come, but I've really been through a lot of the fire and burned off a lot of karma. I burned off a lot of ego. I'm humbled by the power of negativity and evil in the world, and I want no part of it. Like, I'm very much committed to a path of light and love, and that's not because I'm a nice guy or to virtue signal. It's just like the opposite sucks so bad that I don't want any part of that anymore in my life.
It's a great message in itself. So you make this transformation, you come out of a very dire situation and you start making the recovery process. Let's talk about the recovery process, how spirituality and health, I think, kind of work together. And because obviously, I mean, you would think of hearing your history, most people wouldn't think that you look as good as you do, you look as healthy as you're radiant. It's a power to the body's capacity to heal. It's also the power to what's the daily practice and how did you get to this place? I mean, I go on your site and I see all the fun biohacking gear. I see all the, like, I'm like, it's like, this is the world I love. How did that start to unfold for you and that process?
Well, the thing that, the hard thing about talking about addiction recovery is that the ways in which most of us escape, the most successful methods of escape are anonymous, So it's like, I always have to kind of dance around that point, but sure. I can't safely say, I mean, I guess a way to say it would be that the most profoundly impactful system of organized principles that's helped me with the recovery piece have been the 12 steps. I mean, say like,
fantastic.
It's just, I don't care what your problem is. I truly believe if one honestly applies the spiritual principles that just happen to be codified in the 12 steps to your life, that you can overcome any addiction. And I've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times in my own lifetime. So that was my initial path. That was the beginning in a path that I'm still on. It's interwoven into the fiber of my being. There's no way that I could ever, well, I could drink and then I could remove it, I think, or dampen it or shadow it out. But the fabric of those particular principles, which are self-honesty, humility, acceptance, surrender, making restitution, making amends, taking a personal inventory, really looking at yourself honestly, a community, sharing, expressing love, being of service, applying prayer to your life, applying meditation to your life. These are the principles of the 12 steps. And that's just who I am. It's not like, oh yeah, when I have time, I do this thing over here that I learned in the 12 steps. Like, no, it's just, that's literally my character now, because those principles are not something that I do. Those principles are something that I am.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's beautiful.
From that foundation, which of course didn't come in the first 30 days or the first 6 months. You know what I'm saying? I mean, this is, as I said, 21 plus years of becoming that man, of having that level of integrity and knowing that there's plenty of work left to be done. I discover things every day. I'm like, I got to work on that. Phone addiction. Let's address that. Not beat myself up, not freak out, not be self-deprecating. Don't panic, but honestly take a look in the mirror and go, wow, you really have a hard time just leaving your phone in the other room for 10 minutes. What's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is I'm going to miss out on that dopamine hit from that exciting or terrifying text that I might get, yep. Or that, the email that comes in that rejects me, and I'm going to feel that pain of rejection. I have to deal with that. Or the email that comes in and accepts me and I get elated from that. It's all those games. But applying those principles to my life was the first foundational piece. But as it relates to health, what I soon discovered was that my physical vessel, the meat suit that my soul's cruising around in, was terribly damaged throughout those years of self-destruction. And because I started so young, I mean, God knows the damage that I did to my psyche and physiologically to my brain and neurotransmitters. And I mean, I was jacked up when I first got sober. I mean, God, my diet was horrific. And I mean, all I ate pretty much was gluten and dairy. I think that was like my main two sources of, just think, and sugar, just like, oh my God, I wish I could see my labs, like my functional medicine labs from 1997 compared to now. I am aging backwards quite literally. So what I started to discover was that, cool, I can do this spiritual work. I can start working on the metaphysical element of my life, the way that I think. I got really into Emmett Fox. He's one of my favorite spiritual teachers, sort of a Christian Science from the 20s and 30s, kind of that movement, Napoleon Hill, that kind of old school Christian principled teachings, but at the same time kind of anti-religion, if that makes any sense. But that was all about really being the steward of your thoughts and watching your mind. So I started working on all of that, but I had to get into detoxing. So for me, the things that were sort of popular and known in the 90s were infrared saunas. Right. I have one sitting right behind me on your video there, my clear light sauna. I'm still into the saunas. And then I started doing a lot of fasting, a lot of juicing, making my own kombucha. What else? A lot of colonics. Yeah. I went to Hawaii to Angel Farms, which I think is still there on the Big Island. And I did like 14 days in a row of gravity colonics infused with ozone and herbs and all this stuff. That was actually a huge breakthrough for me physically. A lot of stuff cleared up.
I went through a similar thing in my.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I did the colonics. It was fantastic. Infrared. Say like. This is the pathway. It seems. Keep going.
And then I got into superfoods and herbalism. So I started exploring the, in the beginning, the superfoods were like bee pollen. And then
who turned you onto that whole? Who turned you onto influencers or?
God, the first guy I got into is Dr. Richard Schultz.
Yeah.
I played in a band with this guy, Greg Stewart, who's still a musician, great musician. I played in a band with him, and he worked at the American Botanical Pharmacy.
Yeah, that's not very far from here. It's over here in the Venice area.
Yeah, right? And it's weird because they're sort of off the radar, that
True.
Richard Schultz doesn't do a lot of public stuff anymore that I've noticed. They're not at the biohacking conferences. They just do their own little thing, but he's a traditional American herbalist. So, very much focused on detoxing the liver, the gallbladder, colonics for sure, a lot of colon cleansing, taking bentonite clay, then taking herbs to make the clay come out and drag out everything else with it. Parasite cleansing, things like that. Mm-hmm. Green superfoods, being a vegetarian. I became a vegetarian for about 10 years. So Richard Schultz was the first guy, and I started to feel better, and I started to apply his modalities of cleansing and nourishing. And then from there, started to learn a lot from David Wolfe. That's when I really got into the medicinal mushrooms, and then Truth Calkins, who
from Erewhon, right?
Yeah,
Wow, he's fantastic.
Yeah, the guy that kind of invented still many of the current recipes at the Erewhon smoothie bar. So I got into making these really powerful tonics and working with Truth, and then fast forwarding a few years ago, started learning more about the biohacking stuff from Dave Asprey and worked with him as a coach for quite some time. And
we were just at Dave's place.
Cool.
He's got a wonderful play factory up in.
I've heard Alpha Labs. Yeah, I've heard.
Yeah, we were over there. It's like the candy store for biohackers. It was awesome.
That's awesome. So and that's fast forwarding through a lot of that. Eventually found that vegetarianism was not, my body didn't align with that after a time. And so, now I think my lifestyle is very simple. The physical practice, I think because I've become habituated to doing them and they're just automated. So I wake up, I get naked in front of my Juve. Every night I take an infrared sauna. I lay on my biomat. I have something called an AMP coil, which is PEMF and biofeedback device. I have a NanoV, which makes exclusion zone water that you inhale.
Love
molecular hydrogen.
Found one last night.
Vital reaction. I mean, it's like I've just integrated a lot of these practices and supplementation stuff into my lifestyle. So it's not like I don't even have to take time aside to necessarily go do it. If I'm going to be sitting on my sofa and reading or watching Netflix or whatever I'm doing, answering some emails, I might as well be connected to 10 gadgets for that 20 minutes. Or if I meditate, why?
I'm so with you.
It's like,
last night,
I meditate every day for 20 minutes, twice a day. It's like, why just meditate if I can meditate while I'm hooked up to a bunch of devices that support my health?
I love it.
So to other people, it appears like, oh my God, it's like a full-time job. How do you do all this stuff? But it's just like, I always tell people, is it difficult for you to take a shower and brush your teeth and pop a squat every morning? It's like, no, it's just, that's your morning routine. Well, my morning routine just stacks a number of other modalities like brushing your teeth into the self-care practices, and so I think the practices have gotten much more sophisticated for me, but when it's all said and done, Wade, it's like, I have a Facebook group for my podcast, the Lifestylist podcast Facebook group. And in there, people only talk about health, and I'm like, have you guys listened to the podcast? Like,
Right.
50% of the stuff I cover is about spirituality. And so I think many of us, myself included, can get sidetracked in all the biohacking and becoming physically fit and looking great and losing weight and all that stuff. But all of the physical stuff that I do and the health supporting practices and modalities is just so that I can fulfill my spiritual mission here on earth. Like, I only do that so I feel good enough and have the energy to go out and share my gifts and to be of service. And so it's not like, oh, I take a bunch of supplements just so I'm awesome. It's like, no, I do that so I can contribute my highest self and not be bogged down with mitochondrial dysfunction or parasites or whatever type of physical ailment or restriction I happen to be experiencing. So I think that's an important thing for people to understand. My message is not like, cool, fix your health and you'll be happy. No, dude, you got to go back and fix your relationships with mommy, with daddy. You got to face your trauma. I mean, you don't have to do anything. I'm just saying, to become a fully integrated, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically healthy person, we all have to deal with all of that abandonment, neglect, whatever it was, And sure, some people had enlightened parents and maybe they didn't experience much of that, and they might have a little less work to do this time around, But I think the connection with a higher power, whatever that looks like for people, is the absolute number one priority. But it's difficult to do that if you have brain fog because you have freaking Lyme disease, or you just had a stroke, or you have diabetes, or, you have heart disease, you have fibromyalgia, you have on and on and on. Like, how can you be a spiritually enlightened being and help bring light and love and service to the world if you're physically dying inside your vehicle? So it's like the vehicle has to be maintained and optimized so that one can go into the world and contribute positive, uplifting, supportive energy.
So true. I know the founder of our company, Matt, and I, we both come through a similar journey, and we always talk about how spirituality is kind of our driving force in our life, and the practices that require that. We arrive to that reality similar to your story. And then biohacking, as that's what I guess it's called. We called it biological optimization. Biohacking, because I have a difference between hacking and optimization. Hacking seems like a shortcut. Optimizing seems like,
I like that. None of those terms I've ever been totally satisfied with. They used to just call me a health nut, like, oh, you're a health nut. That was the first thing, and then it was kind of anti-aging. You'd be like, oh, yes, that's an anti-aging scene. There was kind of that, and then I guess Dave Asprey maybe came up with the biohacking thing, and that's a word. But people always ask me what it means. I'm like, I don't know. I don't necessarily even like that word. It's just, to me, it's sort of like your body is literally, not sort of like, but is quite literally a vehicle to carry your soul around so that you can experience the material plane. And it's sort of your car. And so the physical stuff to me is just learning how to be my own mechanic. I can change a spark plug if one blows. I know how to change the washer fluid. I know how to do everything. So I don't have to take my car to the mechanic, AKA Western medicine, surgery, and big pharma every time something goes wrong. And I can keep that car finely tuned and lubricated and give it everything that it needs to function optimally so that it might not actually break down very often, So, yeah.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on Masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
Right now I'm doing IV ozone. That's my new thing.
I love it.
Yeah, I'm starting to do these 10-pass ozone treatments. I did one last week, and it's crazy at Advanced Biocell, by the way. Just a shout out to Bill at Advanced Biocell in West LA, and really top-notch operation there for the ozone, and quite affordable compared to other places. And I got so much goddamn energy from that ozone that day. I couldn't sleep a wink. I was up all night, like I had done speed or something. I texted Bill the next day. I'm like, dude, because I'm sorry, that's called mitochondria. You have energy after you do ozone. He said that happens to me all the time, and he's done like 58 10-pass IVs of ozone in his lifetime. So
I'm going to have to get Bill on the podcast. I think it's a really
Bill's amazing. Great guy. Yeah, he's committed. And he's a dude. He's quite a few years older than me. And every time I see him, I'm like, dude, you look younger. I mean, he looks fantastic. Just vibrates life force. It's amazing.
That's amazing. So you made another thing I thought was pretty interesting. In that is, you mentioned in your journey of kind of finding your optimal pathway, you were a vegetarian for about 10 years or something like that. I think you mentioned, and then you changed. That, yeah. And I always respect that a lot when people kind of get, I would say, married to a diet. Like every diet has advantages and disadvantages. How did you make that transition? Why did you make that transition? And what was kind of the emotional or psychological components? Because oftentimes I think people really get really identified with diets that may not be suitable for their constitution, or they might have been suitable at a period of time and now they're not. How did that happen for you? And what was that transition like?
Yeah, part of the journey of having my podcast has been to interview people on both sides of the spectrum with different opinions about what's best to eat. And at the end of the day, I think what's best to eat is what makes your body feel good. And you have to ignore all of the dogma and all the noise.
Right.
I know when I eat stuff that agrees with my body, and when I eat stuff that doesn't, I also know it. I mean, I listen to my body. My body's the intelligent being here, right? That's sort of my personality and ego could get very easily wrapped up in like, oh, I eat this and this is my identity. I've been through that though. I used to be very judgmental against people that ate meat because I was a vegetarian. I went vegetarian. I saw this movie called a documentary called Earthlings. And it was this horrific movie narrated by Joaquin Phoenix where it basically explores all of the different ways that human beings exploit other animals, whether it be in rodeos or circuses or pet breeding or factory farming. And there's all this in furs, the clothing industry, all that.
Right.
And they explored this concept called speciesism. And we all know, racism is wrong, sexism is wrong, but we as humans think, F the animals, we can just use them as a commodity and abuse the hell out of them. And when I saw that there was so much jarring footage, it was very compelling. So it wasn't even so much for me at first about the health implications of eating animals. It was more the moral issue of like, God, why do I need to kill something else? Can't I just go eat some broccoli or something? And so it was that, but the issue with that particular viewpoint now in retrospect that was skewed is that this is just my opinion at this point in my life, that the natural order of things in nature is that every living thing eats up the energy of other living things to sustain itself.
Right.
And I don't care if you're talking about bacteria or fungi or small animals, birds of prey, fish, lions, bears, humans, deer, cows, bison, whatever. Everything's eating everything all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Our soil, it's just stuff eating stuff. And then stuff grows out of the soil and other stuff eats that stuff. Then other stuff eats the stuff that ate that stuff. It's kind of just, I'm sorry not to be cold, but it's just the way it works. The flawed sort of myopic vision of that film that I was misled by was that there's no other way to eat animals as a food source that's not completely satanic and abusive. And it turns out there is. And human beings have been doing that since we arrived here on the planet, however and whenever that happened. And I've explored going to the farm where I get my food, Belcampo Farms in Lake Shasta. I've been to the slaughterhouse. I've held the baby pigs that are going to become my bacon. I mean, I've had to really face the reality of that cycle of life and explore the spiritual implications of taking another life to sustain my own and finding a way to be okay with that. And what I've come to is that, A, you can't kill anything because energy can't be killed. What animates that little baby pig is not gone when he turns into bacon. That energy goes somewhere else and becomes something else. I don't know what. I'm not on the other side to know that, but I know that spirit is a fact, and that if there's a way that I can selectively source animal products that are good for my body and that my body yearns for and my body thrives on, that I'm going to do my due diligence and do the best I can to make sure that I'm sourcing those products from human beings that are compassionate and that understand the natural order of things and that aren't abusive to animals. And, one could say, well, it's abusive to kill an animal. Well, not necessarily. Have you ever seen a lion kill a gazelle? You want to talk about bloody murder?
Yeah.
Where I get my burgers, they don't even know what hit them. Not to be cold, but it's a big air gun. They get on top of the cow, like he's in a little chute, and they go boom, boom, and the cow has no idea that anything ever happened. One moment they're there in consciousness, one moment they're not. The cows that are behind them are separated in the chutes. They don't hear anything. They don't see anything. They have no idea what's going on. It's like, I would be very pleased to go out that way. When my time comes to leave the body, please, someone just like knock me in the head with a hammer without me knowing. So
that's one of the concerns Elon Musk is dealing with artificial intelligence.
Right.
How are we going to boot up our Terminators?
So I'm kind of digressing here because it's cool. A loaded topic.
No, I think it's a good one. It is a good one because I think a lot of people struggle with this and aren't able to make the transactions.
Well, I
think
the body has its own innate intelligence, and if we can get the noise out of the way and the media out of the way and the judgment from others out of the way and the virtue signaling of how pure I am because I eat this or I eat that, if we can get all that out of the way and just go, what gives me the most energy? What makes me feel the best physically? For me, that's a lot of healthy fats. That's a lot of great grass-fed bone broth. That's some super nutrient dense foods like spirulina, things like that. Algae. I take a great DHA that's Symbiotica, DHA, algae oil. There's things like that come from plants that are highly concentrated. I eat some salads here or there. I make quite a lot of green smoothies. I eat a lot of wild blueberries. I just find that if I eat legumes, like if I right now ate a big bowl of lentils, I would have like pains in my stomach. I would have cramps. I would be farting. I would be a disaster. When I eat bread, gluten, any type of grains, I'm a disaster. I get inflamed. It doesn't agree with me. So I know what my body likes. And, if there was a way that I could, I don't know. I listen to the body. And I also by going to farms and growing up in the country, I understand that no matter what you grow, when you clear land to grow plants or animals, that thousands upon thousands of creatures die. So if you want to go grow some almonds or some kale, you're killing gophers, snakes. And this isn't like some weird justification of being a meat eater. It's just the fact. If you drive a car down the freeway, you're killing thousands of bugs every mile. I mean, so what? You can't drive then if you don't want anything to die. It's like you can't drive. You definitely can't ride in airplanes because you're going to be killing a bunch of birds. You can't take boats because you're probably disturbing some of the, marine. It's like you literally have to just sit there and in a self-loathing way just die, because anything you go out into the world to get energy from, something else on some level of life has had to die to do that. And and then also, what do you feed your dog? I have a dog sitting here, Cookie. I think it would be morally wrong to try and make my dog a vegan. So if I'm going to feed her meat but I won't eat it myself, what kind of hypocrisy is that? It just gets weird. So that's why I stay out of all the dog.
when you think
I have,
things out. And I think a lot of people don't actually think it out into its intent and its entirety. I just read the book Sapiens. I don't know if you've checked that out.
no, I have not.
It's like a history of humanity and how there was 5 different sapien species,
Oh,
all competing around the same time, and Homo sapien was the one that emerged, and why that happened. And the one thing that came out of that book that was pretty interesting is we are, like, humans are really good at getting rid of other species on the planet. We're world class at it. Like we've started with most of the big animals that we've taken out, and we've kind of moved on. And that's just the nature of things. And I think a lot of people just don't recognize that. I know you're pressed for time. I want to keep talking for an hour. I'm going to have to bring you back on the show. There's so much I want to talk about.
Anytime. I lose track of the time. Let me see, what do we got? 12:01. Yeah, I've got an interview at 1. So yeah, we will wrap up in a couple of minutes here. Sure.
Cool. So let's talk about a couple of things and before we complete.
Oh, can I just wait? Can I just go back and just say, I respect all human beings' decisions to eat whatever they want to eat. And I've interviewed a lot of people that have very compelling reasons to live a plant-based lifestyle and to not eat animal products. And I totally respect that. I come again from the world of recovery, and one of our main mottos there is live and let live.
Yeah.
So whatever gets you through the night, as John Lennon said, I'm very pleased if somebody does that. What I've found in my health journey, in terms of dietary choices, is different things work for different people at different times. So I didn't know that you could get farm to table, grass-fed, pasture-raised animal products. When I quit eating meat, the only thing there was to me, it was all McDonald's. It was all factory farms. So the choices I made as a vegetarian were much better. I ate much more organic food, much more vegetables. I mean, it was step up from where I was, but then there were other elements that were missing. But it was great for that time. And I have friends that have been raw vegan for a certain period of time, and it was like a cleanse. And then they start to become malnourished and have other issues, and they go back on bone broth, and they ease their way back into very selective animal products and things like that. So it would be ill-advised that someone allows their ego to start to identify themselves by the fuel they put in their vehicle. It's like me.
It's kind of a bizarre thing, isn't it?
Well, it is, it's one of those things. The ego will attach to any identity. It's like, oh, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm a socialist, I'm a lesbian, I'm a homosexual, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm black, I'm white. It's like, no, none of that is true. It's all noise. What each of us are is a spiritual being who's riding around and kind of trapped in this suit that's made of meat.
Protoplasm.
Yeah, and whether or not you choose to put more
full
meat,
of bugs.
Yeah, if you choose to put more meat inside your meat or not does not define who you are. You see what I'm saying? We're already, I'm made of meat. So if I put some more meat inside the meat that I'm made of, like whatever, if I decide not to put more meat inside the meat that I am, who cares? Like, let's talk about how to become enlightened. Let's talk about how to find God, how to express our higher selves. That's the real mission here. And to get caught up in the ego identifications is, man, it's going to trip some of us up for a long time, and we'll be just sort of spinning our wheels on that misidentification of who and what we are. So that's my last statement on that particular thing. Do what makes you happy, and try to not be a dick to other people. That's my motto.
Super well said and well advised in the kind of the digital media world that we live in, where it's cool to be troll or cool to be part of a group and attack another. This kind of digital tribal mentality. We look at tribalism; it didn't work out so well. We're at war constantly.
Right.
We're seeing it in this digital age.
Right.
Before we go, top 3 books on health, top 3 books on spirituality, top 3 books on self-development.
Let's see. I'll start with spirituality because that's the low-hanging fruit. I haven't read that many books on health now that I think about it. Couple. Spirituality, I would say there's a lot of amazingly powerful books by David R. Hawkins.
Love David R. My favorite.
His most popular book is Power versus Force, but that's my least favorite. It's very dry and just sort of short and to the point. It kind of just is an introduction to his work. But he has some other works that are really dense. Like one of his books, Reality versus Subjectivity.
Oh, it's awesome.
It took me 2 years to read that book. I mean, you can read, like me at least, I could read one paragraph per day, and it's just like, yeah, it's very, very dense. So the most accessible and I think the most profoundly powerful book by David Hawkins would be his last one. It came out what do you call that? Posthumously or?
Yeah, posthumously.
Posthumously. After he died, is a book called Letting Go.
Fantastic. Just recommended to a friend of mine.
Pathway of Surrender. I mean, that's the only book you need. If you literally just do that, you're set. Like, you're good. Another one, of course, seminal classic that changed my life, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Another great book.
And I'd also say, you know what? I'd have to say, actually, the book Alcoholics Anonymous.
Beautiful.
People in recovery circles refer to as the big book because it's big, and they made it big in the 30s so that people would be willing to pay the $2.95 or whatever.
Crazy.
Yeah, that when the original printings, they made the font really big and they made it a big book so it looks substantial, you know. But that book has changed literally millions and millions of lives across all cultures through that grouping of spiritual principles. I really believe it was divinely gifted to mankind in 1939. And it's not like a book that I necessarily read every day, but one that I read for a long time, every single day, and have absorbed into my life, and is profoundly powerful for
That's awesome.
all people that suffer from any sort of addictions, I think. So those are the three spiritual ones. Health books, let me see. I'd have to say The Bulletproof Diet, Dave Asprey's book.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah, definitely
Helped a lot of people.
Clarifies a lot and simplifies. Oh, what do I eat? What do I not eat? It's like, cool. Let's not eat foods that are inflammatory. How about that? That's it. Eat some healthy fats. Eat some vegetables. Eat some quality animal products, and just don't eat foods that are prone to mold and are going to cause inflammation and things like that. So I think that book is a really great dietary book. One that had an impact on me would be. I don't know if the title is Superfoods. I have it in the other room, but it's by David Wolfe. It's David Wolfe's, main book on superfoods, and that's where he talks all about chaga mushrooms and goji berries and spirulina and bee pollen and aloe vera and all that. I think that's a really good starting point too for people to just get a basic understanding of high nutritional density foods that you can eat. And it's not dogmatic, like don't eat this. It just says add this in, add this in, add this in, which I think is a great way to start to apply healthy food. And let me see, a third one. What would be a third book? Oh, I have a whole bookshelf over there. That's funny. I haven't read that many books about health. I think I've learned from listening to podcasts and audiobooks. That's the only two that I can really think of on health at the moment.
Okay, so pick maybe an authority. Pick maybe authority on health, or a couple of them that might have influenced you the most.
I think, God, I got to say, authority-wise, early in my journey, David Wolfe, I really learned a lot from him. As I've said, the medicinal mushrooms, the rediscovering of spring water. David Wolfe. Oh, another one, my friend Daniel Vitalis. Both of those guys.
Daniel's great. Yeah.
I used to go see Daniel's lectures a lot and listen to his pod. I think that's the only podcast in the world I've probably listened to every single episode of, was the Rewild Yourself podcast. It went for a few seasons, and he's, I think, on hiatus right now. But Daniel Vitalis's work is really powerful because he doesn't have a book, but just as a thought leader in the space of just lifestyle and diet, it's all about just getting back to our evolutionary standards, what got us here, what helped us to survive, and becoming undomesticated in a number of different ways. So Vitalis, and then also Dave Asprey. When I discovered Bulletproof Coffee a number of years ago and started working with him, his approach I really like, because the Bulletproof Diet itself and his whole approach is not like, this is bad, this is good, this is right, this is wrong. It's not from a dualistic point of view. It's all done on a spectrum. So it's like, cool, much
like the Hawkins scale, right?
Yeah, it is. It's funny. There is a correlation there. It's like that way there you get out of the guilt and shame sort of spiral of like, oh God, I ate a donut, I'm a loser. It's like, well, no, a donut is not as optimal as, a spoonful of grass-fed ghee or whatever.
Right.
But a donut is still better than, let me think of something like a full GMO cheeseburger from Burger King or whatever, like just the most toxic food you can think of, or something that's loaded with aspartame or something like that. It's like, well, a donut is actually on the scale is technically above a Diet Coke. Let's just say that. Yeah. If you force me at gunpoint right now to drink a Diet Coke or eat a donut, I'll eat 5 donuts before I'll take half a cup of a Diet Coke.
That's great.
So I like Asprey's approach because it's on a spectrum, and that takes the guilt and all that stuff out of it. Just like, cool, I'm going to try and stay in the green zone. And the same thing, like you said, with Hawkins' scale of consciousness on a emotional and spiritual and psychological level. Let me try and stay in the higher states of consciousness and not dip down into guilt, shame, anger, condemnation, being critical, being resentful, all
anger,
of that stuff.
Pride.
Fear, all those lower negative states. It's like, cool, let me be aware of that and not beat myself up if oh man, I had a jealous thought. Oh God, I'm not spiritual. It's like, no, it's a thought, and I identify it. Or I ate something that wasn't optimal. I mean, I still have binges. Sometimes I'll stop at the gas station. I'll eat like a king size M&Ms. And then I'll watch my mind go, oh, you loser. What if somebody sees you that listens to your podcast?
Isn't that interesting how that happens?
And I'm just like, dude, I'm human. I'm not trying to be
of course.
Just the M&Ms were better than some MSG-filled Doritos.
Or starving.
Yeah,
exactly.
So that's, in terms of leaders and things like that, I like the more temperate views that apply and provide really quality information backed up by data, backed up by science, but also presented in a way that gives you a little bit of breathing room that doesn't become too strict and dogmatic.
Okay, 3 books or influencers in self-development.
Self-development. Let's see. What have I been into lately? I mean, it's tough to kind of differentiate between the spiritual teachers and personal development. It's all kind of the same thing. Who I really like, dude? I really like Zig Ziglar.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, old school.
He was a force. Old school force. Yeah. One of my first books.
Very powerful. Zig Ziglar. Also a little bit more on the professional bent, but Brian Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Tracy did some great stuff just on time management and just being responsible for yourself. Really good stuff there. And then personal development. I haven't read a Tony Robbins book, but I've been to one of his events, and I'm going to another one in December, the Date with Destiny, the big one in Florida. And I have to say, just as a juggernaut of like, a beacon of someone that says, hey man, you can have a good life no matter who you are, no matter where you come from. Just someone that exudes so much powerful energy and positivity. He's someone that I really look up to, and, kind of strictly within the confines of personal development, because he incorporates spirituality, metaphysics, and also physical practices. He does his ice baths and his rebounders and does a lot of the stuff that I do.
Yeah.
Somehow, makes that sort of accessible to the general public, which is a really, really powerful.
Luke, we're definitely going to have you back. If somebody is struggling in their life or they want to go to the next level, what would your message be for them? And 2, how would you like to be known in the world? What's the legacy that you would like to leave? Who's Luke? Who's Luke?
First part of the question, if someone's struggling in their life and wants help or wants support, what can they do? Oh God, that's a deep question. There's so many ways to answer that. It's like, how do you boil down the core of it? I would tell that person that no matter what appearances are, no matter what your intellect is presenting you with, that you are absolutely flawless and made of nothing but God's love.
Beautiful.
And that despite appearances, you, like all of us, have the ability to access who you really are, your true self, and to demonstrate that in the world. But it requires sacrifices, and the sacrifices are the traps of the ego, the traps of the personality, the traps of intellectual pride, the traps of victimhood, the traps of character defects and false beliefs. Those things have to be surrendered, and it's very uncomfortable to let them go. But the rewards of letting them go is having the clouds cleared so that you have access to divinity.
Beautifully.
See, it's not that.
Beautifully said.
It's not that we have to go seek God. It's that we have to get the things within us that are obscuring the view of God.
Yes.
God's not gone anywhere. If you can't find God, guess who moved? It wasn't God, man. You moved. Intellectual pride, closed-mindedness, those types of things. Self. What's the word I'm looking for? Self-pity. Those types of things that block us from the experience of God. So I would say you are absolutely perfect, and you can experience the love of God, but there are sacrifices that need to be made. And as far as legacy and what I'd like to be remembered for, I don't know that it's important that I am remembered. I think that it's
that's great
about the impact that I'm having while I'm here, and when I'm gone, I'm gone. And if there's something that's trickled down through the ethers, but there'll be new voices by then to come take my place when I leave the body, and they'll be there to do their work, and I'll go jump in another body and do something else. I'll pop out in freaking Sri Lanka in 2099 and I'll do my thing over there or wherever, But I would like, as I live my life, to be remembered, if at all, as just someone who helped other people. Just someone who was of service and cared about other people. Because for me, self-centeredness and selfishness is, it's the core of what I've been working myself away from for all of these years, to become other-centered, outward-centered, God-centered, rather than being trapped within the confines of me and how I feel and what people think and what I look like and success and getting what I want and money and security and having my instincts fulfilled and all of that stuff. It's like, I think the highest calling is just to be one that is spending their energy to serve others. And so if people view me in that way, that would be the highest compliment I think a human could have.
Beautifully said. How do people find out more about you? How do they reach you? Are you speaking anywhere? Anything coming up? Please, you have the floor here to come.
When's your show gonna air? Because I don't want to retroactively.
Probably in a couple weeks. We'll probably.
Okay, so yeah, we're in early October now. I'll be at October 13th and 14th at an event called Mercado Sagrado here in LA. If your show comes out after that, I'm sorry you guys missed it. Then I'll be speaking at Whitma Live in New York City on October 25th. And then I'll be presenting a workshop on spirituality at Rama Institute in New York City on October 27th, 2018. So those are some events I have going. My main channel of content and connection with the world is my podcast, which is called The Stylist. And you can find that wherever you find podcasts. And then the mothership website is lukestorey.com, STOREY. And at lukestorey.com, there's my biohacking and supplement store and all kinds of videos and links to the podcast and all kinds of content there as well.
It's a great store. Check it out. I think I have at least half the products on there myself. It's like this guy, it's like you went into my cupboard and found.
Well, you know what it is it gets laborious as my tribe grows to just single-handedly make recommendations to people. Sure. Like, hey, what's the best this? What's the best that? I'm like, you know what? I don't even sell anything. And when I say store, I mean, I just have a collection of links. I've curated a body of links on my website so that if you're like, oh, I wonder what's the best fish oil, you're going to go there and not find any fish oil because most of it's rancid and toxic. What you're going to find is some really pure DHA oil with astaxanthin, because based on my current level of understanding, that trumps any fish oil or krill oil or whatever. So I pride myself in kind of doing a lot of research and finding the best products and brands, and I just link to them there to save everybody time and energy. And also there's discount codes and stuff like that, and all that.
Absolutely love it. Luke, you've been a pleasure. I wish we had more time. You too. We'll get you back on the show again. And thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. It's going to be, I can't wait to turn it out. I think our audience is going to love it.
Thanks for having me, Wade. I appreciate it, man.
You bet.
All right. Take care.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip. Turn cultured foods into superfoods. Raw fermented foods like sauerkraut and low sugar live yogurt can be good for you, but rarely have enough of the right probiotic strains for therapeutic benefit. So here's a way that you can turn them into superfoods. What I do is I get some raw sauerkraut or a healthy yogurt. Ideally, it's grass-fed or coconut-based, and you can empty 3 caps of P3OM into a container and mix it up thoroughly. leave it at room temperature for a couple of hours before putting it back into the fridge. And what's going to happen is these probiotic levels will be multiplied. In fact, it doubles every 20 minutes. And then what you're going to get is you're going to have a food with strong proteolytic activity. To learn more about P3OM and why its patented strains make it the strongest probiotic available, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.